Hey, welcome to our latest live stream, everyone. Mike Mearls. I am the group manager for the D&D R&D team, and with me today is Greg Bilsland.
Hi, I'm producer. The producer.
Yeah, the laconic Greg Bilsland.
I like to keep it brief.
So today we have an unboxing for the 5th edition D&D Starter Set. We're going to pull the plastic off a brand new copy. It's one of the advanced copies that we got from our printing company. Actually, we printed this through Hasbro in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. So it didn't have to travel too far, not as far as sometimes box sets have to go. So yeah, this is a fresh, still in shrink wrap, exactly in the same condition that you'll find it at your local game store. Without much further ado, Greg, do you want to do the honors of? So we've got. Obviously, the shrink wrap
Isn't it wonderful?
And Trevor's our guy, the technical guy. If Greg moves the things off the screen, just feel free to let us know. Greg always be sure to recycle. I don't know if this is recyclable.
I thought that was your Vanna White hand from what
So a little bit about the piece that's on the front of the starter set. This is actually a much larger piece. Probably seen it used in several other places. It actually gets recycled.
You see the user behind us?
Yeah.
They don't see it.
No, they can't see it.
It gets recycled on the covers, which we'll show shortly.
Some people have said slower. Do it slow. Savor it.
Savor it.
It's like Christmas.
Very slow. Ooh, so we have dice. You get one of each of the classic polyhedrals. And then, of course, the D20. Do you want to roll the D20 or should I?
All right, why don't you roll the D20?
All right.
Hand's not.
Here, let's do it on this box.
Okay.
Can everyone see it? Okay. 18.
All right.
It's very nice. So now it's 16.
Okay.
Right, this is a good die.
All right.
What you're not hearing, or what you don't know, is that they just determined who gets all of the bonus. Mike apparently gets Greg's bonus. We're good.
Aww.
The another thing to show off, you might not be able to see it, is the box is fairly durable. It's got some nice heft to it, so you can keep stuff in it. It's cardstock. It is not like bulletproof, but it's designed so you can, if you have other booklets you want to put in there or printouts, whatever, they can all fit in.
One of the things we did during the box production was we actually put around some images and some titles along the sides. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Initially that wasn't planned, but it was a nice addition to kind of give it a more cohesive feel. So on the top, we have the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the adventure, the 64-page adventure accompanying the starter set. We'll get into what's in the adventure in a little while, but we'll go through all the components. Talk about the starter set rulebook a bit, Mike.
Yeah, so for the rulebook, it's 32 pages. It has all the rules that you need to run the adventure that comes with the starter set. It summarizes everything like spells, basic rules for combat, all that other stuff. As you can see, the back page is a summary of the conditions. I hope it does. I couldn't quite see it with the glare.
Yeah, it does.
But that's what I've been led to believe.
Last you checked.
So the idea is that as a DM, as you're running the adventure with a 64-page book, you may have that open in front of you. And then you have the rule book that you can pass around to the players, but they need to look something up. Or if you're running it as DM, you can reference, say, like a condition, from the back page, or a spell. If a player uses a spell, that's all in this booklet too. So that's why we looked at doing the two booklets as opposed to one larger booklet. It's probably best to think of the rule book as a play aid as you're playing along, something that's really meant to be shared with the players. Everyone's passing around and using it. And that's actually also part of the long-term use. If you buy the starter set, then go on to buy the player's handbook or download basic D&D, this is still meant to be a useful tool that players can pass around. If someone doesn't own a player's handbook, or someone wants to look up something like on opportunity attacks or price lists for equipment and weapons, that's still something that you can use at the table. So those are the two books, and that's basically how they work together.
You have a favorite piece of art in that first book you want to show off?
My favorite, let's see, actually, I think my favorite might be in the other book.
And to clear up, the art in these two books, well, at least the art in that book, is actually lifted from the PHB as well, isn't it?
It's not just the PHB. So we use art that appears in the PHB books. So.
Go ahead and put it right about the camera's recording. You can lift it up too to show it off if you want.
So one of the things that we've done actually in all the books is tried to show a lot of adventuring parties together, fulfilling the classic roles, classic classes, and all the classic races. So this is one of those great examples of that.
Yeah, this the page design here is a little bit more. Doesn't have as much art as you'll find in the core rule books, because with the page count we're working with, we really wanted to emphasize text, making sure everything was complete. You'll see once we get to start showing off the player's handbook that there's a lot more art than there has been in past editions, a lot more graphic design behind it. But this is a little bit more emphasizing on the text, and obviously like some of the box text and whatnot, calling out things. But it doesn't have quite the design flourishes that you'll see in the hardcover books.
Yeah, the rulebook itself has a lot more brevity compared to the player's handbook, where we're trying to keep the rules within that 32-page span.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the player's handbook to the art, we take a lot more time to provide examples and talk about the worlds of D&D.
Yeah, and in terms of compatibility, the rules material here in this rulebook was all transplanted over to the player's handbook. And then additional material was added as needed, either options or just more details on how something works. And then that material will then be extracted from the player's handbook and used to build basic D&D. So they're all the same game. There's no sense of, well, the starter set has some fundamentally different rule or is missing some key component. It is the rules of the game. And that was actually something early on when we talked about within the table of contents, things like the combat section is about 2 pages long. We really wanted to be able to boil things down. Those sort of core rules that everyone has to learn, make those as brief as possible. We didn't want to make them so brief that they're hard to learn and understand, but it was more the philosophy of, if it's a rule that everyone should learn to keep the game moving, keep that rule as simple as possible. So that basically sums up the starter set rulebook. We'll go into the adventure a little bit more, like Greg said, but now we're going to talk a little bit about the pre-gen characters. So we're going to start pulling those guys out.
And we've previewed a couple of these on Twitter and Facebook on our website already, but...
Yep, we've shown off the fighter, one of the 2 fighters, and also the dwarf cleric.
Yeah, one of the fighters emphasizes melee a little bit more, while the other one emphasizes ranged a little bit more.
Yeah.
Here we have a fighter with a folk hero background.
Yeah, that should be, that's our, let's see, is it our, that should be our archer fighter.
Yep, he's got the longbow there. One of the things that you'll notice here is the new character sheet design. These character sheets will be available for download, form fillable down the line when we release the rules. But we tried to go for a more open design than in previous editions, kind of allowing for the flexibility that we know that players enjoy. If you want to write whatever your additional class features there, you can.
Like under features and traits, it's really just an open space for you to just note whatever is important to you.
Mm-hmm. We also added a section on what we kind of consider the role-playing elements to the front. That was a big point we wanted to make, is that we treat ideals, bonds, flaws, personality traits as important as things like armor class and ability scores.
Yeah, it's not by accident that your sort of combat section here has the same real estate as your role-playing section over here. And we've been talking a lot about traits. You probably can't see it, but there's little markers here. But if you've seen them online, you'll have seen there's a box for traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. And really how those add that real depth to a character beyond just alignment or a couple trait words like clever or greedy.
One of the other things we've done with the character sheet that you won't see in the starter set, but you'll see in the downloadable version and the player's handbook, is it has a kind of modular approach to where we tried to make it so that in this case, a first level character could work on just 1 page, but we recognize that as characters advance and people acquire new treasure and new abilities and spells, they'll need to add more to their character sheet. So we have several additional sheets that will be able to accompany this for those type of advanced characters.
Yeah, probably what you'd find is if you're not a spellcaster, or if you're not a character with a lot of spells, you can probably get away with using this if you're just noting the names of your spells. And then if you actually want to flip this character sheet over, this design to the back is unique to this set. This is essentially just where we wanted to put your character's background for the pre-gen, enough information about like humans in the world of D&D and the Forgotten Realms in this case, the fighter, and then information on gaining levels. The formal character sheet, the second page, is essentially a spell sheet. So if you are a spellcaster, you can note what spells you have prepared, what spells you have access to, and that sort of thing. Because that's obviously probably as you're gaining levels, as a spellcaster as opposed to say a fighter, you're going to have just more things to track. So
one of the things that we've done on these characters is provided all of the guidelines for leveling up. So if you are just running the starter set, you have a player has everything that they need. However, with basic D&D out there, you could actually start with this character and then look at that and maybe look at some other options, or you could even go to the player's handbook once that's out and mix and match your options.
Exactly. And the character sheet, the full character sheet that we designed for the player's handbook, will be included with basic D&D and also be available.
Is it going to be stretch for you if you put it up here?
That's fine.
It's a little fuzzy.
So that's our folk hero fighter, who's more of the archer, light armor, woodsy type.
And here we have the acolyte wizard, the acolyte being the background. And the wizard, as you can see, has a lot more of that real estate used here, partly because the wizard's an elf and has some racial traits, unlike the human has racial traits as well, but they aren't quite as extensive.
Yeah.
And then on the back, you'll see that we have a separate section for spell casting that shows the advancement of the spell slots per level.
Yeah, and this is a case where we'd assume you'd have access to the rulebook or basic D&D for things like as you gain more spells. Not all of the spells are on this character sheet. So.
Yeah, and this relies on spells that are in the rulebook here, but you could easily add more as you go. And we fully expect that the cleric or the wizard might be using the rulebook on a fairly regular basis as they refer to their spells.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet is the backgrounds on these characters. So while we are using the backgrounds associated with the player's handbook, like Acolyte or Folk Hero, we actually have added backgrounds in this section that plug into the adventure. And this is a big approach that we're a shift in our approach to how we're doing adventures and trying to give players the immediate tie into what's going on in the adventure.
Yeah, this is actually something which we added to Hoard of the Dragon Queen, the first adventure for Tyranny of Dragons. There's actually a page in the back of the adventure that gives you character hooks that you would use in place of or in addition to a bond or a trait or anything else you might create for your character. These are specifically tailored to the adventure. They refer to NPCs or treasures or locations that show up at some point in the campaign to really give your character a hook. We've done in the past. We have actually a meeting room here that is a one-way mirror where people can come in and play a game, and people from R&D can watch them attempt to play it and learn it. And one of the things we saw with D&D was people just wouldn't really know what to do. If there was a dungeon adventure, let's say in one of the older starter sets, or just having the DM create a scenario, there was always that moment of uncertainty for players, like, what should I be doing here? Like, what does my character want to do? Or what's kind of that goal that I should be striving for? If you played video games, most video games start off with a first level that's pretty clearly like, oh, you're in a burning building and you must escape. Or you're chasing someone, or aliens are boarding your ship and you need to get to an escape pod. So, and that's kind of how they teach the game. You get this very clear goal, and then you learn the mechanics as you try to get that very clear goal. So what we're doing here with the backgrounds is showing the player, well, your character, let's take a look, using the elf as an example, I can just read it off. You are here because you've, let's see, your personal goal is reconsecrate the defiled altar. So you know that there is a shrine that was once sacred to Ogma, a deity from the realms, and you want to go reclaim it because it has been claimed and defiled by the vile goblin god Maglabiot. So, and it gives you a little more information on, on the story behind that. And so as a player, well, this is why my character's here. This is what my character wants to do. And as it turns out, you encounter some goblins fairly early on in the adventure, so the player knows, okay, I'm on the trail of completing my character's personal goal.
One of the things I think you want to do as a dungeon master in preparing this adventure is familiarize yourself with the character sheets as well as the adventure, because that's going to immediately tell you what the players have investment in as they go into the adventure.
Yeah, and if you find, if your players want to create characters or you want to add a 6th or 7th character to the mix, it would be a good idea to take a look at some of these backgrounds and either have players share a goal or as you're reading through and prepping the adventure, think of how you can link an NPC or a location to a freshly made character so everyone kind of has that clear story hook.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of connections in these backgrounds specifically to NPCs within the town where a lot of the action takes place, and so trying to leverage those NPCs as a way to get characters invested in the story was a big push in this adventure.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to our rogue, our halfling rogue, who has the criminal background.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. He actually has a very interesting background that ties into one of the villain groups in the adventure. We don't want to spoil too much, but I think it's probably one of the more not maybe precarious or dangerous of the backgrounds.
Yeah.
Depending on what you pick, although I think there's one coming up that's a little more dangerous.
Yeah, so I think the folk heroes' drive to reclaim the ruined village, now I'm totally blanking on the name, of course, is probably the one reclaiming Thunder Tree is probably the one that's most likely to get you killed.
One of the discussions we had early on is, well, we're making a starter set, and this is a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and we probably should have some dragons in it, or at least one.
A dragon.
But how are we going to do this when dragons are this huge threat, and this is a level 1 to 5 adventure? So let's just say that the folk hero is going to have some challenges.
Yeah.
So we don't have to belabor this too much, but we'll just take a quick look at the back side. One of the things we've added for all of the, well, actually for all of the races, I think, except maybe the human, is name suggestions.
Yeah, the human also has his name suggestions.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah, it draws on the different cultures of the realms. So it kind of gives some of the cultures that are prominent in the Sword Coast, or if the culture isn't on the Sword Coast physically, like maybe travelers from that culture would be there. So there's a number of different suggestions. So it's not just one list. It's a several. Well, I think each example is from a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Because we knew that even though a lot of people are going to be existing D&D fans who buy this, there may be people who come to this who don't know what a halfling is or don't understand what an elf means outside of the context of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So one of the things we had to actually do, since we didn't have the character creation materials in this one, was to supply some of that information, knowing that maybe this will be people's first experience rather than something like basic D&D.
And by design, with everything here, the idea is, let's say if you bought this set, and either your first time playing 5th edition or you're a completely new DM. The idea is if you have someone in your group who wants to play the rogue, you can just hand them the character sheet, and while they're reading over it, you can be prepping the adventure. So a player might read the background section, the race section, look over their special abilities. The rogue has got a number of them, so a little more complicated than, say, the fighter. But the idea is the DM's prepping, the players can prep, and then you can just start playing. So rather than having, say, to understand your character needing to pass the rulebook around, you just need the character sheet. So, and who's next on our parade? Do we have the cleric?
Cleric.
Yeah, this is the one we actually posted this just today.
Did we post both sides of it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I spoiled the whole thing.
That's all we had for everybody. You can just move on. Dwarf cleric.
Well, maybe not everybody has seen that, but so you can talk about it a little bit.
I can talk a little bit about some of the other things we put on the front of the character sheet. We did actually playtest the character sheets quite extensively.
Yeah.
We went through 4 or 5 rounds trying to get the right configuration of information, and actually using a little bit of like website design, usability topics to kind of figure out how to orient the most important information, the information you're referencing most often, as well as the information we want to remind you of constantly, like your ideals, bonds, flaws, and traits.
Yeah. That's actually, you might notice we ended up with the modifier for your ability as the big number, and your ability score is the smaller number, because in play especially, it's not too often you need to know the score, you often need to roll using the modifier. So.
However, we didn't go on to actually write modifier or score because we wanted to leave people with the blank character sheet the flexibility to choose the way that they wanted to do it.
Yeah. So if you like having your score there, you can write it that way, and then your modifier below, or vice versa.
Another thing was just, these are small things, but adding a lot of space to write hit points, because there's nothing more frustrating than having that small line for your hit points, and after one combat, you've already exhausted all of your space.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the...
This is our fighter. This is actually the fighter we previewed last week. It's the Noble, our lawful neutral fighter who's looking to reestablish his family, or her family, in the region of Neverwinter.
And actually, that's a good point. We didn't assign these any names or genders because we wanted to let people have the flexibility to actually decide those things.
Yeah. We found that was like enough if you wanted to get people just immediately playing. Giving your character name felt like a good level of, I mean, it's one thing you can do that's sort of yours without asking you to sit down and make a character and go through that entire process. See, and again, that's in basic D&D. But we felt that's just enough of a customization that you can feel, well, this character sheet, even though it's pre-gen, it's mine. So.
Yeah. Well, we've already previewed him. We'll just do a quick look on the back.
And see fighter, much simpler. A lot of white space compared to, say, the rogue or the...
Yeah, we really struggled. I think the cleric was actually the biggest struggle, and we had to make lots of small tweaks to get it to fit.
And of course, we have the ad sheet,
which has a fun surprise on the back side.
Yep. So it's what is it? Oh no, I know what it is. Just turn it over to some photos, compromising photos of me. So so just need an ad for D&D encounters, and then the big reveal, blank character sheet.
Yeah, this was actually a late edition. When we realized we had the real estate, we thought it would be a nice opportunity to give somebody a character sheet that they could then take to encounters or just use with basic D&D to make a new character.
Yeah, and it's obviously easy to photocopy, and it's just the one side. So if you're making up your basic character, really relying on the blank space to capture everything you need, as opposed to the player's handbook character sheet, which has, I think it's a 3-page character sheet.
Yep, there's the third page after the spell sheet has more in place for like a character portrait, or you to put a picture that you draw. It also has some information, a space for your faction, if you decide to choose a faction or you're associated with, as well as things like magic items and treasure.
Yeah.
There is some space actually on this one for equipment, but it's somewhat limited.
Yeah, again, smaller. And then of course there's the Space Maker. So this is kind of funny to get to see the business side of things. A box, the depth is usually determined by making sure that if someone shells this product in a store, Walmart, Target, or your local game store, that it has enough of a presence that people will notice it when they walk by. And I guess the good news for you, as someone who might buy this set, is that you can just pull this out, and now you have more space to keep dice, pencils, character sheets.
Miniatures.
Yeah, miniatures and all that other stuff. So.
Can we actually talk about the miniatures for this?
I hope so, because we just did.
Miniatures have been announced up on WizKids. Some of them have been shown off. We've been showing off the dragons. So we have a partnership with WizKids for miniatures, and we also have one with Gale Force 9 for unpainted miniatures. So you can talk about that.
Yeah, so WizKids will have a set of pre-painted plastic miniatures for use with this starter set. The character miniatures, so it's one miniature for each character, plus Drist. So it's basically like it's a male human fighter whose weapon and armor matches the character that comes with it.
Like I think there's a gold elf and a mountain dwarf, and no, it's a gold dwarf.
It's a gold dwarf, sun elf.
Sun elf, right?
Yep, and then a halfling for the rogue.
Yep.
I think it's 4 hero miniatures and then a Drist miniature. So.
All right. Well, now we'll talk a little bit more about the adventure. Let's pull this out.
You don't have to worry about that camera anymore.
Okay. So the adventure, the 64-page book, is in 4 parts, kind of divided into your stages of adventuring. So I do want to caution anybody who may be thinking about playing this that we'll try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, but there may be a few things that could potentially spoil some monsters or...
Yeah. It's kind of for the DMs of the world who are thinking of running this, so...
The adventure starts with a fairly simple encounter. It kind of goes back to that idea of easing people into the adventuring experience. So the first couple pages tell you how to dungeon master, because a lot of people may be coming to this as new players, new dungeon masters who don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
And we actually want to make sure that we have even more support for them than this, but again, given the constraints, we provide some basic information about determining DCs, about how to create a scene and role play, and then jump in.
Yeah. And so the first encounter is with some nasty goblins who are kind of behind the sort of main plot, I'd say, of the adventure. And so for DM, you get a step-by-step here's how to set things up. You get a nice quick fight. And then after that, as the players try to track down what these goblins are up to, it shifts to a little bit of an exploration bent as you're sort of following the goblins' trail, and then you get to experience your first dungeon. And so that is the Kragmaw hideout, and it's, let's see, I'm looking at the map right now. It says about 8 encounter locations, and it's a self-contained dungeon. The players come here with a clear sense of purpose. I don't know if we want to spoil too much of the plot.
I wouldn't go too far in, but we kind of designed I shouldn't say we, but we worked with the
Rich
writer
Baker,
to design a starting area that could be played in a single session if it was a long enough session. I think about maybe like 4 or 5 hours for a pretty...
Actually, for this dungeon, playtime's probably about... let's assume you've already played D&D before. You probably get through this in about an hour and a half or 2 hours.
2 hours, yeah. And if you're learning, maybe a little bit longer.
Probably like an extra half hour or so to get the rules down. So then you have... So basically you're going through I don't want to call it a tutorial dungeon, because once the dungeon starts out, there's information in each encounter area that tells you, well, if the players want to climb the wall, here's something that, here's how to take care of that. It also talks a little bit about managing the dungeon. Like, it might say, well, if the goblins have a chance, they will run from this area to alert the goblins over in this area. So it also kind of shows DMs how an adventure site in D&D is sort of a living place. It's not just one room to the next room to the next. It really is like it's a location with interdependencies, I guess I'd say. It's not as complicated as a word like interdependencies makes it sound, but it just shows DMs that within a dungeon, the creatures live here, this is their home, this is like their little fortress. They kind of have a sense of the relationships between the different creatures.
Yeah, and there's actually an opportunity to play off of some of those relationships and rivalries in the dungeon, which I think is one of the first opportunities for people maybe coming to this new to see how their interactions can affect an environment.
Yeah, and that's probably something if you're DMing this adventure, one of the pieces of advice I'd give is whenever possible, look for ways to present things, creatures or encounters or locations that aren't predicated on violence. I know as a DM, when the players, let's say you're going through the Kragmaw hideout dungeon, if you describe a location, then say if you're using miniatures and battle mat or tiles, immediately pull them out and set things up and roll for initiative, the players are just going to follow that cue to fight. What I think Rich did a great job in designing the adventure of doing was creating a lot of instances where you have the opportunity to either role play, sneak past creatures, come up with inventive solutions. It isn't just walking through and trying to stomp down every creature in melee. I mean, you can do that if you want to fight, but there's a real sense, there's, for instance, a later dungeon, not to give any spoilers, but there's an entire sidebar in it, the intro part, that explains, well, if the players want to trick their way past the people in this dungeon, the creatures here, here's how to handle that. So one of the things I think Rich did a good job of was avoiding a situation where there's only one solution to any problem. The only way you can deal with this guy is by outright attacking him. I mean, obviously there's like a monster, like there might be a Grick you run into that's just it's a beast that's just going to attack you. But the emphasis is really on the idea of the creative play. The 3 pillars we've talked about, interaction, exploration, and combat. We wanted to make sure it wasn't just one of those pillars reigning supreme, where everything was just combat or just exploration and interaction. It's really all 3 are possibilities depending on how the group and how the DM wants to approach the adventure.
Part of, I think, what works well for the locations in this is they're all very non-linear, and that's another part of it is you can sneak into dungeons, you can trick your way into adventure locations, you can interact with the NPCs there, or if you really just want, you can fight your way in. The maps themselves have lots of different routes to go about actually getting in to a location. I mean, in one case here, like the ruins of Thunder Tree, it's really an open, ruined village, so you can approach from any angle that you want. We could talk a little bit about the town. So one of the inspirations when we were talking to Rich about writing this adventure was Keep on the Borderlands and Village of Hamlet.
And an adventure called Night's Dark Terror that was adventure that came out in the mid-'80s from TSR UK that kind of was meant to transition you from the basic rules and dungeons to the expert rules and outdoor adventuring.
When we first actually did this adventure, or when he was writing the adventure, we're going to try and get by without a town map. We learned through playtesting that it was actually necessary to have the town map because people wanted to get a sense of what were the locations that they could go to. I mean, even Village of Homeland 40, 30 years ago had a map of the town.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah,
okay. Just making sure.
Confirming with the older game. You've only been playing D&D since third, so so along the lines of those adventures we just rattled off, the three of them, the basic structure at the beginning it's a little bit linear because it's about okay, you haven't played D&D before or haven't played 5th, so here's your goblin ambush and here's kind of the trail of breadcrumbs that leads to your first dungeon, and then once you've got your feet underneath you, you as a DM, you probably ran your first session as a player, you've gotten a little bit used to your character, then things start to open up. And this goes back to the pre-generated characters where it's important to give them these clear goals so players kind of know where to go next and give players a real sense of that they had choices. It isn't just a matter of, well, you defeated the kobolds, now you go fight the goblins, then you go fight the hobgoblins. If you think of Keep in the Borderlands, when we included it in the playtest, when playtest first began, that was one of the really big pieces of feedback we got, was people liked the open-ended nature of it. And I remember being at Winter Fantasy in 2012 and just walking around and overhearing tables playing and the really crazily different directions people took the adventure. Mm-hmm. And that I thought was a really great a testament to the adventure itself. Though I had to admit, I'm not a big fan of Keep in the Borderlands. I think it's a good adventure, but I always liked it wasn't necessarily my favorite adventure, but I do have to admit it has a great flexibility, and that's really it's the strength of it. And it's something that's hard to get right in an adventure. Yeah. Sorry, do you want to say that?
Well, just one of the differences in this is actually providing all of those breadcrumbs that I think Keep on the Borderlands sort of just throws you to the wilderness, literally, and lets you wander around and find locations to adventure in.
Yeah.
Whereas and die.
And usually die. Yeah. Whereas we've talked about the backgrounds here, and actually a lot of even that first dungeon, the Cragmaw Cave, has lots of little hints that point at things you can do in town, whether it's an NPC you discover or some items in the cave that you find that again give you those hooks to pull people into the next portions of the adventure and let them find out things for themselves.
Yeah, you kind of think like in Village of Hamlet, where there's a sense of the moat house as the dungeon outside of town that everyone in town kind of knows about or has some suspicions about, and that's kind of how you end up going in that direction. So having that direction, that was something we learned, especially while watching people playtest, because almost every DM at Winter Fantasy created their own set of story hooks. And I think we provided a set too for DMs if they didn't really have their own.
Yeah, there was some included, yep.
So it's adding that little bit of sense of direction, because what happens in the adventure, once you get through the first dungeon, and you go to Phandalin, from there things get very wide open. I think one of the things as a DM running this adventure is don't think of it in terms of, well, here's the main story, because there's kind of the main plot hook that ties you in. The adventure isn't necessarily over when the players resolve that story. It's really only over like when you decided you don't want to run the game anymore or you want to move on to something else. Because while you could do things in one order, you might decide let's just burn through the main storyline as quickly as possible. This person needs our help, let's go help them. Or you can do more of this kind of side questy kind of things, which is the character's individual goals. Mm-hmm. So you could defeat sort of the big bad guy, but still have plenty of several sessions of play left because the characters still now want to go pursue their own personal agendas. And so there's no real sense like you must do A, then B, then C, other than that first adventure. Now the second section is a little bit more. It's not a railroad by any means, but you get kind of pushed toward it, and that was really designed so in case players are still kind of, we're not really sure what we want to do, or everyone wants to go off in a different direction, there is like kind of an obvious, like, well, now that we're in Phandalin, there's a clear problem that we could resolve. Mm-hmm. And so that's a nice thing if you find your players aren't really sure where to go, you can run that adventure. But even that one, they don't need to go into that dungeon and deal with things.
There's not any particular urgency to it, so they could arrive in town and then leave immediately again on one of the other portions of the adventure.
Yeah, and I think as a DM running it, what might be a good thing to think of is if the players are getting a little bit stalled out, is think of some of the NPCs and the adventure locations. Think of how they can take on a more active role to bring in complications, to get the players moving, give them a sense of purpose, what they want to do. Or if the players just go off in a direction, they let them. Don't feel like, well, the players must defeat these creatures before they can go to this location. Yeah. Since it is fairly open-ended, if, for instance, the players, I'll just pick out a location at random, if they decide immediately to wander over to Old Owl Well and start poking around, it's one of the locations get pointed to. If they get in over their heads, they can always run, they can always try to talk their way through the situation, like I mentioned earlier. Almost every location is designed to be approached in multiple ways. So the players can only get in as much trouble as they get themselves into.
For the most part, the adventure sections can be played at a variety of levels. Even though there is, as you mentioned, kind of a progression that probably most groups are going to take. You could go to Old Owl Well when you're level 2 or you're level 4 or level 5. There may be some sections like this that some groups never experience.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things we expect is that people are going to want to take these characters on to participate either in Horde of the Dragon Queen potentially, or our D&D Expeditions adventures. We are making this legal within the Adventurers League. If you play it in stores, you can actually get magic item certificates that go along with your characters.
So the Adventurers League certs won't be available until August. There's a little bit of a delay in just getting all that material ready to go.
This is actually available on August 3rd at WPN locations.
Yeah. So if you
the starter's July 3rd.
The starter goes on sale July 3rd, but official organized play support for it doesn't go live. Yeah. But if you do play it in July as an OP adventure, just record what happened, and then when the forms and certs are available from your store, or if you're just tracking, this is also available for home play, for organized play. So just track that. If you're doing home play, you can just note your character's progression, and then when Adventurers League launches in August, you can just update your character, or get your tracking sheets and fill everything out then. So.
One of the other things I wanted to mention was it was a late edition, but used our 5 factions in the adventure to kind of lay some groundwork. While it's not very prominent, because we know that at this point, if people are already getting used to a new rules system, they're going to have a lot to digest. We still planted some hooks about like the Zentarum and a Harper agent and a druid that's part of the Emerald Enclave, all to kind of give players actually the opportunity to connect to some of these factions.
Exactly. So when you get to Phandalin, if the players take the time to talk to some of the NPCs, many of them have ties to either some of the adventure locations in the area or to the factions. So you might meet someone in town who says, well, I've heard there's been orcs have been sighted to the east, and we're worried they may be returning in force because the orcs, an orc horde ages ago, swept through this area and destroyed everything. They may hire you, ask you, go investigate. Or there might just be, well, I'm looking for there's a druid friend of mine who's gone missing, or I'm worried about him. Last he was seen in this area. Can you go and check in on him for me? And things like that. So there's a lot of areas, and there's a little bit of an overlap sometimes. You might have one of the pre-gen characters' goals might be to go to a location. Then you might meet an NPC who also wants you to go there. So there's plenty of hooks to get the players involved with the different adventure locations and dungeons and in this adventure as a whole.
Looks like Trevor was giving us the clock look, so
I was
maybe
just looking. This is interesting. You guys are keeping it going pretty well. You guys have anything else you want to talk about while we get other questions?
I think we hit the main notes. I think there's 4 dungeons total, right? And then there's like 3 or 4 adventure locations.
Yeah, and the magic item and creature statistics are in the back.
Yep. That's one thing worth pointing out. Yeah, so if you are handing the rulebook over to your players as a DM, they are not seeing the monsters or magic items. So if you let the players have the other book all they want, let them get their grubby little fingers on it. If they're like my players, they'll have melted chocolate and grease on them. This book, I as a DM, get to keep pristine because things like the magic items, which I won't spoil, but they're in here, and the rules for tuning them and how to use them are in here. And then the monsters.
Well, we can spoil a few of them.
But we can spoil one. What's some of the? Oh, there's a.
I was thinking the.
You're pointing at this guy here.
Yeah.
So there's gauntlets of ogre power you can find in the adventure, and those just set your strength to 19. So when you put them on, you just get strength 19. It's pretty good for a fighter at low levels if you haven't boosted your strength yet, or if you have a character like a rogue who might want to use strength but might not have a very high score. You can get a big boost out of it. So that is one of the items you can find. And they're actually, mostly it's potions. And let's see, so the entirety of the adventure, I will kind of count off. I think there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
While you're counting, one of the approaches we took to magic items was to, because not every magic item is necessarily going to be found, we have to kind of consider that as we're creating the adventure, that maybe they'll only find 1 or 2 magic items. Maybe they won't find any, but for players for players who are willing to explore and look around, they're going to find more treasure under the cracks and crevices.
Yeah. So setting aside potions and scrolls, anything that can be consumed, I believe there are 10 total magic items that you can find. So you figure your characters will be 5th, maybe even knocking a little, or 6th level by the time they finish the adventure. Each character will have 1 or 2 permanent items. So, and then monsters in the back. Once the now there's a little bit of a gap because basic D&D at launch will just have character creation, but once it's updated with adventure creation in August, you can use these stat blocks. They have their XP values, their challenge ratings.
We do have some of the new monster art in here as well.
And we have a few NPCs back here, whose I won't name because
some short descriptions of some of the monsters, because again, if they don't have a picture in here, this might be some player's first chance to see them. We did try to put a lot of iconic D&D monsters in here, really focusing in on what we think new players should experience. Being dissolved by certain monsters.
So there's about, let's see, 14, there's about 20 to 30 monsters statted out in here. That includes a couple named NPCs who get stat blocks. So yeah, so once you have basic D&D with just this set, once you know how to create encounters, you can keep adventuring for a while. If you want to just sketch out more stuff around Phandalin, more adventures of your own creation, that was something that I think, again, Keeping the Borderlands did a great job of. You get this real sense you can expand the world. So again, we really wanted to capture that with a starter set, especially for a new DM. You can run the adventure, and then you can start adding your own little locations. And we tried to show with the dungeons here, there isn't like one big dungeon, let's say 3 or 4 levels. They tend to be smaller, like 4 smaller dungeons, let's say 8 to 12 locations. So the final dungeon, there's one bigger dungeon that has more areas to it. But to show new DMs, like, hey, you don't have to write, a treatise, a 50-page adventure to be ready. You can just start with a small dungeon area, have 2 or 3 entrances, so there's some variety. Don't make it too linear, and maybe sketch out 6 to 8 areas, and that's an adventure. That's something that can keep the group occupied for an evening. So, or with some of our locations, it really might just be here's just a couple paragraphs, describing here's this ruined tower, and here's the creature that has moved in and why, and then kind of set up. This is, if the players want to talk to this creature, here's what happens. If they attack it, here's what happens. And here's maybe even a quest. And that's another thing we emphasized too, was there's plenty of opportunities to meet an NPC during an adventure. Like you might rescue someone from a cell, or you might meet a creature that's moved into a location, and it's actually there, it's looking for a magic item, and it's not hostile. It might be of dubious morality, but it isn't really here to fight anyone. It's looking for some lost item, and so maybe the characters end up getting an adventure hook, and it sends them to their next location, and things like that. So.
And on the final page is an index, which people can use. That actually points, that's the rules index.
We're so excited to have an index. I'm always excited to see indexes.
As players are asking their DM, wait, which page is the rules for
weapons?
Yeah.
Page 17.
Which they can then look in the rule book to find.
Exactly. So that's, again, something we're trying to, idea being this might be the adventure book is on the DM side of the screen, and then the players are passing the rule book around. So. And we also have a list of the folks who play tested the adventure. So
we definitely appreciated our play testers on this one.
Very much
through
so,
several rounds, and we continue to play test a lot of our other elements.
And to be fair, we didn't name the thousands of people who joined the poet playtest. I believe they got a mention in there. They got a mention somewhere.
Credits,
but we did not name them all. Because one, that would be a breach of our confidentiality. Because I'm not even sure we got your names.
No, I don't think we did.
And it would also take about a quarter of the book.
It would be, it's 175,000 playtests, well, more than that, but that's just kind of like the nice number that ends in 5s and 0s. So that'd be 350,000 words to name everyone. That's about by the typical sort of like our page count, that would be like 128 pages. I think if we used full size regular font, yeah. So
we should make that as a PDF online. I know one of the things that a lot of people asked for was if we could see an example of a monster stat block. So I have the camera set up here. Let me see if I can make that.
Just find a page that
somewhat
we're not
visible.
giving away anything. To.
Well, this one seems fine. There's just this guy here, and he helps you. So seeing his stat block's not going to.
I was actually going to say that one, but
yeah,
because then we get some art as well.
Yeah. So where
Go ahead and stick it on the box.
Okay. So here you can take a look at the ogre. You should be able to see his stat block and some art.
It's a little bit reflective, so I can't do anything about that.
And can they see the entire page? Because there's a couple other guys.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. There's a reflection right over where the ogre part is. So
Yeah,
that's probably the best for the top.
so is it legible?
Yeah, I can read it. I can actually read everything on it.
Yeah, so if you're looking at an ogre, ogres are pretty straightforward creatures. They just try to hit you as hard as they can. They're not very smart, but they can wreak havoc, especially if the DM's dice get hot.
Yeah.
Getting critted by an ogre is not fun, as a druid in a playtest I ran a while back discovered. So
Yeah, and in some cases, like the ogre, we don't want to overthink the monster. If we try to distill it down to its most essential essence, and for an ogre, that's hitting very hard.
Yeah, and a mean DM might give the ogre levels in fighter, so you get the improved crit ability, which is pretty terrible as a player to face.
Chris Sims really didn't seem to enjoy that.
One of the things that's been asked here in chat a little bit, and it's come up from a lot of people who, some of the more experienced players, the fighter that we showed off has a second wind ability. One of the things that, I'll just ask this question first because it might clear things up. Can you use a second wind ability outside of combat?
Yeah, I can use whatever I want. Yeah.
Okay, so that means someone can just use it constantly?
Well, there's a funny thing there. Yes, you could use it constantly, but since you have to take a short rest to use it, you're better off using your short rest to spend your hit dice. Then, I mean, by the time you'd heal up, especially if you're a higher level fighter, you may as well have just used an extended rest.
Yeah, we're talking about like using hit dice as a resource that goes away, and then second wind is just constant. You can just constantly do it without using any hit dice. That's the weird. I'm going to say super cheesy, because if you did that at my table, I'd be like, what are you doing?
No, but you can, if you're to walk through it, the rest of the group has to let you keep resting for an hour to get 1d10. Plus, I believe it's your level back in hit points.
Which also, once you advance more than a couple levels, you're going to have 5 or 10 or 15 hit dice, which you're also adding to your Constitution modifier to, which is giving you eventually a lot more than.
Do you want to pass the fight over here? I'm always paranoid I'm going to start speaking off the cuff and get something wrong.
No, and to be fair, these guys have like. This part of the rules the guys are talking about are not the rules they're working on now. So
no, and it's something which in playtest actually was very popular. So, and I know we were at one point we talked about making it temporary hit points, but people really liked. And again, playtest is very popular with playtesters. It's something that lets you basically pull your butt out of the fire. If, let's say, an ogre with levels of fighter, because your DM's being a little bit of a jerk, crits you, and you're down to only a couple hit points, you might use second wind, and it's a bonus action. So to just give yourself a little bit more of a buffer until the cleric can heal you, or the bard could heal you, or the druid could heal you, or you could drink a potion. But yeah, no, the way it works, if you to try to spam the ability, you're basically, I mean, we had this ethos very early on with the design of 5th edition. We were not going to try to make rules that would stop people who wanted to be bored from doing boring things. Like, so if you're just like, look, I insist we spend 8 hours in game resting, and then I can use my second wind, then we'll rest again, and I'll use second wind. You can do that. We're not going to stop you from playing D&D that way. But realistically, you're much better off spending your hit dice. And if your kind of DM was like, well, I don't want healing to be that plentiful in my game, well, then you're probably buying the DMG and using any of our...
I was going to say, roll for random encounters.
Yeah, you're rolling for random encounters if they're in the dungeon, or you're using one of the options we'll have for different rates of healing. We just wrote up, if you remember the wound point and vitality point system from Star Wars D20. There's a variant of that that's going to be in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where basically as you take damage, your maximum hit points go down, especially if you take wounds, fairly large wounds, like a 10 or 12 point hit, being different from, say, a 3 or 4 point hit. So if you're thinking as a DM, like, wow, that sounds really good, I don't want my players to abuse it, built in, it's not very abusable. If they're in a dungeon or in any situation where there's a time pressure, I mean, if you're at the point where the players can constantly take 8-hour rests and suffer no drawbacks, the cleric and the wizard are getting all their spells back, Everyone else is healing back up to full because after a long rest, the basic rule, the core rule, is you heal everything back up. We decided to be very liberal with that because it's easier for a group to tone things down than it is to necessarily punch them up. So yeah, it's one of those things where if you have a player who decides I want to bring the game to a halt and insist we have to keep taking our rests so that I can use my second win ability, then it's just either it's a table issue or it's not, or maybe you want to look at using an optional rule from the DMG.
And to quote from the book, encounters with wandering monsters are an effective way to keep players and characters on their toes, alleviate player boredom, and tax party resources.
Yeah.
And below that is a nice wandering monsters table.
Yeah. But I think what you'll find as you see as the fifth edition rolls out, there'll probably be more things like that in the game where you're like, well, if I did this 8 times in a row, or if I could use this ability repeatedly with, in a vacuum, it's going to seem strange. And it's like, well, yeah, because we've designed these things and play tested them, assuming you're playing you're playing through the game. That, yeah, you are in a dungeon. So if you want to keep resting for an hour, a monster might show up, things like that. You're trying to travel from point A to point B, and you have a time limit. Well, if you keep resting for an hour and you get there late, oh, well, the orcs attacked the village before you got there. So things like that. This is just something that's always been part of D&D. Whenever you have a game where you can rest and get back abilities, it's always something a DM has to be aware of. So yeah, we're not trying to go out of our way to design around that because it really just depends on your priorities as you play the game. So.
One more thing here. We have time for a little bit more than that probably, but one more for sure.
We started a little late, so.
How many hours do you think of play is in the starter set?
You're going to reach level 5, and levels 1 and 2 are quicker now than they were in prior editions. So let's say 2 hours each for levels 1 and 2. You think that's fair, Greg?
It's going to depend a lot, depending on if you're learning to play or not.
Let's assume you're not learning to play.
Like
hour and a half, 2 hours each for the first.
Say 2 hours. I really think
2
to 4 hours for that first session. Because I think even if they're running through it quick, they're going to do it. If you're exploring a lot and interacting a lot, it could go as much as 4 hours.
Yeah.
But
4 hours just seems long, though. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to really be dragging.
But in that dungeon,
it's probably looking like 2 to 4 hours there.
Yeah, and if you're hardcore role players, of course, you can have more hours involved. That's always the way it is.
But so I'd assume with five levels, you're probably looking at 16 to 24 hours of gameplay. I think if your group's really on point and focused, you can probably do it in like 4-hour sessions.
I apparently tend to estimate a little differently because I would say 20 to 30.
Yeah.
But I think so much of it depends on how much your players want to explore those locations. Because if you could probably spend a couple hours on each of the adventure locations, you could spend 2 to 6 hours on any of the dungeons, depending on how much role playing you're doing. And the last dungeon. Probably even 4 to 8 hours. I think it's a very robust adventure, and you get a lot out of the 64 pages, enough to easily keep a group busy for a month or two.
Oh, and that was definitely that was the idea. Like at least 16 hours. If you're super focused, 4-hour sessions, and that's if you're very type A. Like let's just beat stuff up and do quickly.
I think 16 is probably doable if you really are focused on just playing through the kind of main plot line. Being very focused.
Yeah, but so I think say 20 to 30 hours for most groups, probably like around 25 hours. So if you're playing it for 4 hours a pop, that's about six sessions. If you're doing 1 or 2 hours a pop, that's like kind of like your campaign for the rest of the year. So. Yeah.
Two monster-related questions here. First, since there's one on the cover, is there a green dragon someplace in the adventure?
There is a green dragon someplace in the adventure. I will spoil that. We put one on the cover, so we got to put one in the adventure. I think they did the cover. The cover may have come first because
I don't think so. No, I think we picked the cover image because there was a green dragon in the adventure. Yeah. That's going to be exciting.
It will be very exciting.
We didn't get that far when we were playtesting. We just got into Phandalin and did some exploring before we had to quit because we were all working.
Yeah.
But
the green dragon is you don't have to fight the green dragon.
You don't have to fight the green dragon.
Let's just say that.
You'll be wreathed in glory if you do fight the green dragon and somehow win without cheating. But you
dragons are scary. Yeah. They are really scary.
That's a philosophical approach too. Like I know, and we have in the past had your first little adventures and you get to fight a dragon and win. we decided we didn't want to do that. In a lot of games, I think there's real value in having enemies that if you see them at first level, you just want to run. And we felt dragons haven't always necessarily gotten their due in D&D. So we really wanted to make it, if you see a dragon, you have to be really ready for it, or you have to be like getting closer to double-digit levels than first to feel like you could take one in a straight-up fight.
Another monster question. About how many monsters are in the starter set here?
There's a couple dozen. I want to say there's probably about 24.
You don't have to get exact.
Yeah, there's a couple dozen.
Greg's going to count them all now.
There's about 5 pages of it and about 4 monsters a piece.
So five front and back?
Actually, no, it's 5 front and back, so it's actually closer to like 30 monsters.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. And again, that's all the monsters in the adventure. And then there's also things like there's random encounter tables when you're traveling in the area around the town, Phandalin. So there's like some creatures that might not actually show up in an adventure, but there's still a stat block for them if you run into them. And that's great if you want to create an add-on adventure without reusing monsters. That'd be a good place to start looting monsters. Would be the random encounter table.
How much information is there about the area in like the area around Phandalin?
Yeah.
Is it something that people can use for hooks for continuing to draft words? And
yeah, it's enough there to for that region around Phandalin to keep you playing. There isn't a lot of depth to it because again, it really focuses on the main adventure locations. But you've got you basically got the city
map already actually on the web.
Yeah.
So we actually put a lot of interesting adventure locations on there. It's a hex map, so
you can track
people are super excited to see the front of the hex maps. By the way,
and the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to go into a lot more detail. This one just essentially uses it as a just kind of simplest form.
Travel times for wandering monsters and stuff.
But
yeah, it doesn't go into too much detail on places that aren't adventure locations, but again, there's forests, hills, mountains, and everything there, so you want to start adding adventure locations. You have plenty of space to play with.
Yeah, and actually the location is not all that far off from where our current adventure our previous adventure in D&D Encounters, Scourge of the Sword Coast, was running, so it might actually be very familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just north of Waterdeep.
Yep.
So I've seen a couple questions about the basic rules. I just want to clear some stuff up if I could. We have one basic rules update coming out in July, which covers the basic how to play and how to create some characters, I believe.
Some characters.
And then we're going to update that again with monsters August.
Yep, August. There'll be monsters and DM information and magic items.
Okay.
So now what's going to happen is it won't be until the end of the year that all that stuff is set in stone because the monster manual and DMG are still in process. So essentially, we're going to give you a preview of stuff that's still being worked on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So particularly with the Dungeon Master's Guide, because that is probably going to still be in the building when we're posting some of that stuff.
Yeah. So it's going to start out as basically a live document. We'll be updating it much more regularly than we will, let's say, after we close the books on 2014. But until the end of the year, it's going to essentially be like in a beta.
Yeah, and we'll track versions on it: 1.1, 1.2, 1.3.
And actually, the first one will probably be like 0 point something. We'll probably hit 1.0 at the end of the year. Yeah. So,
look, the question here is: does this Tourney of Dragons Adventures pick up where the starter set leaves off?
No, but there are actually some seeds in the adventure that point directly to it. And actually, I'll just say related to the Cult of the Dragon.
Yeah, you can run into some of those guys in this adventure. And plus the way the Kobold guys designed the Tourney of Dragons campaign, it's fairly episodic. So if your characters are 5th or 6th level by the time they finish with Lost Mines, it's fairly easy to just zero in on that segment of the campaign in Hoard the Dragon Queen and then pick up the action from there. As a DM, you'd have to summarize kind of what's gone before, and then maybe throw in some hooks that tie things into the action from the starter set. But it's meant to be fairly easy. It's not like something like, well, my characters are 6th level, so I have to start in the middle of a dungeon for things to make sense or anything like that. So.
I've seen a couple questions about D&D Insider, so I'll just go ahead and answer that one. We don't have any plans to change what you're getting from your D&D Insider account right now. So if you're subscribed to D&D Insider for the 40 character builder, the content there, you're still going to have access to that for the foreseeable future. The foreseeable future is for me is like a year, maybe, like as far as we're planning. But our intention there is that we want to make that available to you guys as long as people want it. So
yeah, as long as
we'll keep that up as long as we can, basically. Yeah. But we see mind flayers in the basic rules.
Basically, I have to check the monster list.
Remember if it's on there.
Let's say
Don't commit to anything.
maybe.
Yeah. We definitely want to provide enough monsters that you can play all the way up to level 20.
Yeah.
And so that is going to include some higher level threats.
Yeah.
Anybody else out there have questions you want us to answer here? Because I'm running out of good ones about the starter. Silence. Silence.
Maybe answer them all.
Silence. I would probably have answered them all. They have a lot of questions, but not a whole lot of them about the starter. And I told you guys, starter only. I've answered a couple of questions not about the starter because
That's what future live streams will be for.
I can't help it. But yeah, well, we will continue this. We have at least one more character sheet preview. We're going to preview some more of the art and some other stuff over the next couple of weeks, and then we're going to start.
We're going to start live streaming.
We're going to start live streaming the actual adventure here.
Adventure, yeah. Starting next Monday, we'll have a group of actually non-D&D folks in, so they're going to be seeing the starter, because pretty much everybody in R&D has already played or run the starter set, and so they'll get their first taste of the adventure, and we'll see how far we get in the next couple months.
Yep. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Mike and Greg, for doing the unboxing and having that talk about the adventure and the contents.
Thanks, Trevor, for wrangling everything. So
that part's easy. And we will see all of you in a week when hopefully, unless some crazy stuff happens in the office. We'll see you all in hopefully a week when we start up that adventure. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.